Our next speaker is Breanna Finch. She is the Habitat Program Manager at the Regional Fisheries Enhancement Group, Salmon Solutions. She specializes in vegetative restoration for salmon recovery in the Stillaguamish, Snohomish, and South Island County watersheds. Her talk is titled Mitigation of Reed Canary Grass on Harris Creek.
All right, thank you. I'm going to be talking about our planting at Harris Creek in 2022. Harris Creek is located right off of the Snoqualmie River. It flows centrally through the Snoqualmie Wildlife Unit, acting as an overflow channel for the Snoqualmie River during flood events. And as you can see, it is a whole lot of Reed Canary grass. This is pretty much the entirety. As far as the eye can see, it's just kind of one big corridor of Reed Canary grass. And I'm also going to refer to it as RCG from here on out because it's kind of a mouthful to continue saying the full name. But so we, in this area of Harris Creek, it's saturated most of the year. There's standing water most of the year. So it's just not exactly conducive to trying to control RCG in a way that we would have in the past. So as you've been hearing a lot this morning, we also used live poles, live stakes for this planting. We're going to be doing it in multi-phases. This is the first phase of hopefully many. We have found that it looks like there's about 17 acres of plantable area of just pure RCG along Harris Creek that we'd like to continue planting in the future. We're starting kind of out in little chunks as we go along, see how the plantings work, because there is a lot of beavers in the area. And it's not exactly the most feasible area to be using tubing or caging, considering how many floods are going to be happening all year and the density that we're trying to plant in. It's just not cost effective, time effective to be using caging or tubing. So we're trying a few different methods to avoid losing that canopy that we desire in the planting to shade out the Reed Canary grass. We're using primarily 5 and 6 foot live stakes, all a combination of black cottonwood, Pacific willow, and Sitka willow. And hopefully we're not going to be doing any pre or post maintenance, but the hope is that because all of the live stakes are going to be above weed height at the time of installation, that they will then be able to continue to grow and then create that canopy we're looking for. So, of course, as we've heard this morning, the importance of being able to create shade on the stream, create habitat complexity for the salmon. We're trying to reduce water temperatures, and then hopefully in the long term, the reduction of the RCG will then lead to some natural recruitment of the native riparian vegetation. So we had to kind of tackle the planning of our planting because of the beaver. The beavers are a friend, as we all know, but of course we do want to be able to create that desired canopy. So we tried a few different things. As you can see in the picture that I have here of these kind of circle plots along the map, this is actually a map for phase 2 of our Harris Creek plantings, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But this is kind of the general idea of what we're the planting plans in terms of doing it in little plot sections. Because this is on WDFW property, there are a lot of people who hunt waterfowl out in that area. So we were creating some view corridors for the hunters so that they weren't then creating them themselves as they're going out to hunt and they come out to a dense willow planting and take machetes to our hard work. So we created kind of like some natural view corridors along with the line of the creek and what felt the most natural to us as we were planting. And then in these particular plots, we used a very dense planting pattern on the first two outer rings. They were about 1 foot apart from each other. And then we variated the planting in hopes that maybe beaver would maybe not want to squeeze their bodies through the planting and then, you know, consume and start to nibble on the remainder of the live stakes in that area. So with this planting, the plan was for 5 acres at 1,000 plant per acre density. And the zoning for this planting plan, oh, here's a picture of an example of a view corridor. It's kind of hard to see live stakes in a bunch of RCG and water, but hopefully you get the idea. As we were planting in this sort of density, we realized as we were coming to the end, we were going to need more live stakes. So we originally had planned on 5,000 live stakes for the 5 acres, and we ended up purchasing an additional 2,000 live stakes to continue the density that we were planting at. And then in some of our circle plots, we planted a little bit closer together on the inner circle, because on the outside we were planting 1 foot apart spacing, and on the inside we were planting 5 feet apart. In some of our circle plots, we were planting 3 feet apart on the inside, which purchasing those additional stakes allowed us to do that. The planting altogether with the 7,000 stakes took 3 to 4 crew members 11 days, which is pretty quick for a planting. We did have some minor challenges with the varying water levels and how prone that area is to flooding and elevated water. The ground is very uneven, very easy for crew members to topple over and top their waders out. And planting in standing water in the middle of February and March is fairly uncomfortable. So I do actually have a few suggestions. I don't know, it seems like a lot of people that might be listening today have implemented plantings such as these, but there are a few things that we learned along the way that have been helpful when doing plantings like this, which is this slide. So pond gloves come in real handy because we were having a lot of crew just completely removing their gloves, which it can be a bit of a safety hazard when you're planting in standing water. And sleds, if you aren't using them for your planting, which I know a lot of people are at this point, but if you aren't using them, start, because they come in handy almost all of the time. This picture that I have is actually on the right of the screen, is not from our planting at Harris Creek, but yet we had to rescue some plants out at Cherry Valley after a flood. We had just staged them and it flooded, as you can see, up to the waist. And sleds float, and once you put plants in them, they continue to float. So it was kind of an invaluable investment for planting. So after a year, you know, as expected, beavers did come in, and our density did not, on the outer edges, did not work as well as initially anticipated. However, we did notice quite the pattern, and it's really hard to see in the pictures that I took after going out there and looking at the planting 1 year later. but it looks like they kind of floated in from the creek, from the other side of the creek, and nibbled on, one small section at the beginning of the circle, made their way into the middle of the circle, continued to munch on live steaks throughout the circle, and nibbled their way out to the other side. So in a lot of the areas you can see, it's really dense in some sections. And then there will be some shorter live steaks on one side, not a whole lot of live steaks in the middle, and shorter live steaks on the other side. So they were creating their own corridors, as I'm now calling them, beaver corridors. So we actually have a few different plantings going on in the future out at Harris Creek. We're actually going to be doing restoration for, if I can get back to the slide, for Ducks Unlimited. And CK from Ducks Unlimited is actually the one running that particular thing. We're at Salmon Solutions going to be implementing the planting plans. However, CK's idea for this was to up the live stakes by, well, at this point, it's almost doubling them. And he would like the circle plots to be 1 to 3 foot spacing pretty consistently, rather than doing a dense ring on the outer edge of the plots. And hopefully, and I actually think that based on what it does look like out there after 1 year of the beaver being able to get to the live stakes, I think that this density of planting is actually going to be pretty great for what we're looking for. And then we actually are partnering with Jennifer. Oh my goodness, I am not going to remember her name, but we are partnering with it for a monitoring assessment. So King County is actually doing has a grant for monitoring live stake plantings in Reed Canary Grass. And she is going to be doing a monitoring assessment of Ducks Unlimited's planting at Harris Creek. So it'll be interesting seeing what ends up happening with that planting. And then we are also doing another live stake planting out at Chinook Bend, a natural area. It's a King County owned park. And there is a RCG just laden beaver pond out there. We're going to be doing a few different test plots. There is going to be some tall live stakes, so some 6 foot live stakes as traditional that we were planting out at Harris Creek. And then we were also going to be doing some 12-foot fascines as well. And a little bit different for that particular planting, we are going to be doing 1 year of herbicide treatment prior to planting to see how the live stakes fare after that. And then King County is also going to be doing an assessment of that planting as well. And that's actually all I have. It sounds like I might have finished a little bit early, but I don't know if anyone has any questions.
Let's see, Breanna. We have some questions. Did you work with Hunter to determine the best location and size for the openings between planting islands?
Did we work with the hunters?
Yeah.
No, what we did, and it's hard to say, I guess we could have put some kind of letter out before plantings and reached out to some hunters, but the way that I approached it was to line the view corridors with what felt most appropriate to the line of like the understory up on the higher bank. ways that I was noticing that hunters are actually accessing the creek. So there are some kind of person-made trails that are leading down to the bank. We also left a pretty, like I'd say about a 5 to 6 foot gap along the side of like the higher bank as well, so that they could walk along the edge and then access all of the different corridors along the creek. So it seemed like the best way to approach them still being able to access those hunting areas.
And how deeply did you plant the 6 foot stakes?
At least 2/3, usually about halfway. I mean, it was really easy to plant out there. I mean, as I said, it's saturated most of the year, so we did not have any issues with planting the stakes deep enough.
What herbicides will you be using for the pre-planting treatment?
Yeah, Chinook Bend, typically with RCG, people use glyphosate. That was kind of what we're playing. If anyone has any other recommendations, I don't know if like a Mazapir is something that could be used for a Reed Canary Grass, which I would prefer not to use glyphosate, to be completely honest. I didn't even really want to treat the RCG before, but I understand why, especially with us using the Fichines. I think that they're going to have a lot better of a chance if we do 1 year of herbicide treatment. Yes, it was Jen Vanderhoof. She's running the monitoring. I see that in the Q&A here. Okay. Glyphosate is safer and faster. Okay, than the Mazapir. That's good to know. I'm curious if anyone has anything to say about, in terms of like the effects that glyphosate does have on amphibians. That's my concern. I don't know what the long-term effects of that are in such an aquatic environment, because there's, it's a pond. So if anybody has any insight on that, I'd really love to hear it.
Yeah, there's some comments going into the Q&A box about the difference between Mazapir and glyphosate. Looks like there are differences of opinion. How did you determine what live stake species you planted?
It was actually based on a few King County studies that have been done already. It seems that the Pacific willow and Sitka willow especially Pacific willow, seems to have the best survival rates. And so those were kind of the reason for our next plantings. We're actually, the addition of Mackenzie willow is in there, and I don't actually know. It was a program manager before I took over that ended up ordering those, and I don't know what the addition of those that was based on, because I haven't read anything about them specifically.
Did you establish a baseline water quality with Reed Canary Grass for comparison for after suppression water quality?
I'm so sorry, I did not hear that question.
Did you establish a baseline water quality with the Reed Canary Grass there for comparison for after?
I did not personally know. There is some water quality collection or information on, I believe, Ecology's on Harris Creek, but we did not take water quality assessment prior to planting.
How are fascines used? Did I say that right?
Fascines, yeah. So it's basically a bundle of the small live stakes. The idea is to bury them, and they're going to grow up in a whole lot. Excuse my non-scientific language. There's going to be a lot of shoots up out, and so basically, even if beaver are eating the live stakes, that they're going to continually be able to outcompete the RCG. I think that's like the idea behind trying to use fascines, which would be difficult to try to use fascines without having treated the RCG prior, because they're not going to be as tall. They're not going to be able to outcompete the RCG without having at least one treatment in advance to burying the fascines.
And then there are some questions from the chat. Was there any vegetation management done through establishment period? Any plant protector used, or did you see any issues with herbivory?
So we couldn't use plant protectors in this area. I mean, it just wouldn't make sense. That there's so much flooding in this creek. I mean, it isn't like it's an overflow channel for the Snoqualmie, and I think that, you know, putting plant protectors on these stakes would probably not be very effective. But yeah, we did see herbivory. And honestly, I have to say, like, after 1 year, it's really not too bad. I mean, it still achieved quite a decent plant density. I would say, like, at most, you know, in some areas that were a little bit like affected a little bit more, the spacing was maybe 10 feet apart in some areas. Which this winter we do plan to go and plant an additional 2,000 live stakes out there to help achieve a little bit more density.
Have you explored any other site preparation methods like tilling or ripping the soil?
Yeah, I don't know how that would work at a site like this. It's just, I don't know how you wouldn't really be able to get any machinery down there, and doing that manually sounds absolutely impossible financially. And yeah, I just don't think you could even, the banks are so steep, I don't think you'd be able to get any machinery down at a site like this.
Do you have experience with overseeding or planting native perennial grasses in RCG dominated areas?
Yeah, well, it only one occasion actually. And it didn't work out well, unfortunately. The grasses without, and I guess I need to ask a follow-up question to that question. You know, is the RCG being treated in advance with herbicide? Because in one case we did try to seed a field with native grasses to try to outcompete the RCG, and it was unsuccessful.
Another comment: if you can source them or grow them yourself, consider 8 to 12 foot 2-year whips from coppice with the terminal bud intact, such that the canopy establishes above mature RCG height. It's hard to buy material, but may provide an alternative. 8 to 12 foot, he specifies.
Yeah, I am actually looking into potentially trying to get funding to have our own little willow harvesting area. So that is definitely something that I would like to do.
Under similar planting conditions, do you know the best practice for planting black cottonwood and Schooler's willow in lieu of Pacific Sitka willow?
Do I know the best practice for planting them?
Yeah, that's the question. Black cottonwood.
Well, we did actually plant black cottonwood at this site. We planted black cottonwood, Pacific and Sitka willow, but we did not plant Schooler's willow.
There's a lot of back and forth in the question and answer about herbicides everybody should check out. One question is, how do you apply herbicides in such a wet area?
It's not as well. The aquatic formulas are meant to be applied like in the middle of summer when you could, it's not, I guess the soil is like saturated a lot of the year, but I don't know if I'm not screen share. I don't know if I'm screen sharing anymore. But as you can see from like the pictures, like this is in the middle of winter where it's just covered in water, and the ground is saturated most of the year, but if we were to spray more towards June, I think that's something we could potentially do. But I mean, like, that's the reason why it wasn't even taken into consideration for this project. It's wet like all the time. So that's why the project was planned this way. It's pre and post maintenance just did not seem feasible. Fencing doesn't seem feasible. And so the way that we ended up devising a plan was hoping that density would be the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And that won't, we won't know until for years down the road, at that 3 to 5 year mark when the willows can actually start creating some type of canopy. And obviously the way that riparian plantings are funded, usually it's only a 3-year timeline, which obviously if you're looking at trying to make that kind of establishment in this area, like it's kind of difficult to try to do in a 3-year timeline.
What kind of maintenance do you have after planting?
None. The only thing that we're going to be doing is monitoring, and then assessment for the survival. So we're trying to meet an 80% survival rate. And so we'll be doing it's going to be some light monitoring. It's not transect monitoring or circle plot monitoring. We're going to be just doing some photo monitoring of the area and assessing areas that might need replanting, supplemental plantings.